This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. Today I talk with Jay Papasan, and we speak about one of the most important questions you can ask yourself, the Pareto principle and work-life balance. Enjoy this interview. Hey there, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted today to be joined by Jay Papasan. Jay is co-author of The One Thing, a #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller with over 400 appearances on national bestseller lists and more than 30 translations around the world. Before Jay co-authored the best-selling Millionaire real estate series with Gary Keller, he worked as an editor at HarperCollins Publishers. There, he worked on such best-selling books as Body for Life by Bill Phillips and Go for the Goal by Mia Hamm. Jay also co-owns a successful real estate team affiliated with Keller Williams Realty and with his wife, Wendy, and they both live in beautiful Austin, Texas. And it's my great pleasure to have Jay join us today. So welcome, Jay.
Thanks for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
Oh, there's a lot. And it seems like I was musing with my wife. Seems like every year there's more, but maybe we're growing and so we're capable of handling it. We have about 3 writing projects that are at different stages, not counting the fact that I'm talking to you now around The One Thing. It's still in the promotion phase after 5 years. So I feel like I'm keeping my one thing straight by knowing where I am in the process. But if you'd asked me 10 years ago, do you think you could do what you're doing today? I know I would not have said yes.
So that's interesting. I'm working on 3 books at the same time. So you're part of a kind of a team there as well, in terms of being able to kind of produce at that type of level. How long have you been writing in that form and being writing as part of a team?
I started working with Gary Keller in 2002. So it's been over 15 years that we've been kind of pioneering this kind of way of writing. It started with 3 of us actually. And today it's he and I as the principal authors, and we have a team, 1 full-time researcher and 3 other writers on the team that help us with blog work and some preliminary interviews. So
is there a kind of hard and fast rule of what you will do and what Gary will do on books and how you do kind of a division of labor there?
There is. And because I came from publishing, as you mentioned, when we formed a company to kind of hold the copyrights for our books and to kind of formally use the royalties to reinvest and build more of them, that's my company to run. So that's kind of day to day. I have the activities of helping plot out the content that's in the pipeline and manage it in the different stages of development. Not all the books that we put out were authored by us, just the ones with our names on front, but we've put out 11 books in the last 15 years, and I think 6 of them have our names on the cover. So there's the ones that we authored and the ones that we kind of shepherd through the process. So I handle all the business. I also handle most of the publicity, and Gary gets to wear the mad scientist hat. So when we get to a project that we're passionate about, we definitely collaborate a lot in the research and conceptualization phases. And then when it comes to writing, we alternate. We just pass it back and forth until you can't really tell who's written it or edited it.
And where did you learn your craft, and how did you learn your craft as a writer?
I was looking at that question before we sat down, and it's a tough one. I mean, I started writing when I was probably 12 years old. So I've always had a fascination with fiction. Worked as a bookseller. I worked in publishing. It wasn't until I moved to Austin that I formally jumped from the business side of things, booksellers and, publishing houses, into the other side where being an author. So most of the authorship stuff I've professionally learned in the last 15 years, and a lot of it through trial and error. But I mean, I have all these other moments. I started writing in undergraduate. I started writing at NYU, and they kind of all add up. So I know that's not a terribly satisfactory answer, but I've learned it from a few key people and a whole lot of books and a lot of trial and error.
So I'm wondering, as you're writing, how do you ensure that there's a little bit of a separation of church and state, a separation of the writer you and the marketer you? Because I'm guessing you could be writing something and you could be, one part of you could be is maybe tormented and saying, actually, this is the way I should go because this is a neater marketing angle. I can see how we could use this for marketing. Another part of you saying, actually, no, this is about the craft. How do you figure all that stuff out in your head?
Well, one, I don't know that they have to be separated all the time. I think that, one of my favorite books on writing is by Stephen King, and I'm looking for the spine so I can tell you the title correctly.
Is it on writing, that one?
On writing.
Yeah.
And he has kind of a defense of what a lot of people perceive to be commercial fiction writers. And he says, these are great craftsmen themselves. And there's always this weird duality when I was getting my master's, in writing. These people who felt like to be an artist, you had to be a starving artist, and anybody else was a sellout. And that never really rang true to me. It's like, if I'm going to do this, I'd love to be able to support my family and have a few nice things as well. And I just don't, especially in nonfiction, I don't see that they have to be complete separation. We want to be true to the messages that we're trying to put out there. I do not believe that if you are writing just to a sales category that you're going to be very successful. Certainly not for any amount of time. It'd be kind of like blogging just for Google SEO. It would read horribly. Humans wouldn't read you, but the computers would love you, right? You've got your motivations all backwards, so it's just not effective. But I do think that you should always be thinking of the multiple audiences for your work while you write it, because you're writing for them, not for you. And it's a message that, Gary and I need to get out. I'll say that collectively. We're passionate about this. Let's explore it. And we spent 5 years, close to that, researching the one thing. So that was a long, dark cave we went into before we got to come out and enjoy any of the benefits. I had a lot of fun being in that cave playing mad scientist. But the whole time, our publisher, Ray Bard, who worked very closely with us, was always coming back to who's the market for the book? Who's the reader? Why will they enjoy it? Why will they talk about it? Why would they share it? And it's weird. We only brought the marketing up when we were in the editing phase, but that sometimes led us back to the writing phase. So I think they're arm in arm if you want to be successful, really successful. Otherwise, you might be leaving too much to luck.
Now, in the book, it's a very simple yet incredibly powerful message that kind of lies behind the book. And I was thinking about today, just before we were coming on this, was that you have a question you pose in the book, which is, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary? I think that's just a brilliant question to ask yourself in life, and on so many levels, because it feels the book obviously came around as coming around at a time when a lot of people, whether it's in work or personal life, there's a lot of feeling of overwhelm in people's lives. Right. And I think that was so you can kind of read this book, the one thing from different perspectives. You can read it as that busy manager, or you can read it as the busy person that's having to manage a household, or you can read it as the entrepreneur. But I just love that question because it kind of puts principles first. So when did you get a sense that this was just a question that you and Gary were posing to each other, and this was like fun of just two of you kind of throwing this back and forth? Or was this something that was coming because of real world conversations you were having with clients, for example?
It came definitely from the real world. So the book kind of was born from a very short essay that Gary wrote. We were working on another project and he wanted to write an introduction, and he wrote 14 pages, somewhere in there, little essay called The Power of One. And the question wasn't there, but the moment I read it, I remember I walked into his office and said, this is a book. And he goes, I thought the same thing. And then we started building it out. And the focusing question, it's a mouthful, don't get me wrong. We're very aware of that, but it actually was born from a lot of coaching calls for years and years. Like the very first time I met Gary, he had a headset on, and he would devote 1 or 2 days a month to talking to the top performers in our industry. And he was offering his coaching services essentially for free. But it was also a chance for him to learn. And I don't know if you've got a coach or you've had a coach before, But the rhythm is you talk for 30 minutes or an hour, and at the end of that, you make certain commitments about what you're going to accomplish between now and the next call. And Gary grew very frustrated that these very top people would list out the 5 or 6 things they knew were critical priorities. And then the next week, they might have done 2 or 3 of them, but they rarely did the most important thing. And the way he tells it, over time, he just kind of kept shortening the leash and be like, so James, if you can only do 3 things this week, and then they do 2 and 3, but not number 1. And it was really kind of in frustration. The original phraseology is if you could only get 1 thing done this week in order to X, right? The big objective, what will that be? And what he discovered is when their list of things to do was only 1, they almost always did it. And the aha there is like, if there's only 1 thing on your to-do list, there's really nowhere to hide. You can't say, but I did that. You did or you didn't. And it formed a kind of accountability. And the unexpected outcome was that when people did the number 1 thing, they often did the other 4 or 5 things naturally. And so he made that the kind of the operating principle about how he coached and managed going forward. And that was where that very weird phraseology comes from, because it's born from the idea of Pareto's principle. Like, what are the things that are the most impactful that we can currently do? And we need to be focused on the 1 thing that's most impactful.
And I guess the thing you mentioned, Pareto, Italian economist, but one of the things I always think about the Pareto principle is it's fractal as well. So I think it's like 64-4 is so like the 4% of things you do will generate 64% of the results as well. So you can kind of get further and further down on it as well.
I've seen the numbers play out incredibly. Like, we have a big company. We have 170,000 associates in the field, and we sell, frankly, as of the last time we looked, more real estate than anyone else. And we track all these numbers, and it is crazy how often 80-20 does pop up. But I didn't know it was fractal the way you were describing it. That's new news to me. What I've noticed is in some arenas, like the top 10% might do 50%. Or the top 10% might do 90%. And I usually try to tell people, even though 80-20 shows up kind of an eerie amount of time, it might be because we're looking for it, to be honest. But it shows up. But it's just that there's a minority of things that actually matter. And are you focused on those instead of the other stuff?
Now, one of the things that you also challenge in the book is this notion of work-life balance. Because I'm guessing by the sheer fact of saying 1 thing, this is the thing I'm going to be doing, this I want to achieve today. By doing so, it's going to make everything else easier or necessary. It then precludes you from doing other things, and like work life always feels like it's like 2 different things as opposed to 1 thing. So can you talk about what's your take on work-life balance and how the 1 thing relates to that?
One of the ways I make this point, if I'm doing like a keynote for a company or something, is I'll just make everybody stand up and ask them to stand on 1 foot. And I'll say, great, are you balanced or are you balancing? And they usually get a few chuckles and everybody will say balancing. I'm like, great, you win, sit down. I think the whole point of work-life balance is it's a very recent kind of idea. Like I'm very certain that back in medieval times, serfs weren't complaining about, work-life balance to their medieval overlords, right? This is something that's a very modern kind of thing that we're talking about at all. And the problem with it is that people talk about it like it's a destination you arrive at. When I've done all of this pre-work, when I've arranged my life just so, I will be in balance, like it's a state. And the truth is, that's why we kind of called it a lie, because people approach it the wrong way. It's something that you have to be very active in. And so when we think about work-life balance, at work, because we believe so fundamentally in the 1 thing, we kind of advocate for people to be very out of balance. Because if you're doing 1 thing at the expense of others, there's always going to be some grass fires cropping up. And the more disciplined you are at ignoring them and focusing on the thing that matters more, the faster you grow. And the quicker you can acquire help and other resources to handle all the small stuff. It's why a lot of executives, the company will pay for them to have an executive assistant so they can stay more focused on the big stuff and avoid all of the small stuff, right? Unfortunately, that kind of ratio doesn't play out perfectly in your personal life. If you are so focused on running a marathon that you're ignoring all of your other health, like those things may not be waiting for you by the time you come back. So things like your health, your relationships, your spiritual life, those tend to need more regular attention. And so we kind of divide it into those two categories. At work, identify your top priority and make peace with the fact that other things will be imperfect. And then actively plan so that as things get in the way, you're constantly coming back to those relationships, your health, those things that are self-care on a regular basis so that they're never neglected for too long. And there's I can tell you story after story, but people often will rationalize missing children's soccer games and birthdays, saying they're working so hard for their family. And how long can you postpone those things before they won't be worth going back to? Or that the people that were waiting for you will stop waiting for you. So I think there's a big price to pay, and it's kind of a gamble with your health, with your relationships when you play that game. So that's, when I say it like that, it sounds a little complicated. At work, very straightforward. Focus on one thing. In your personal life, we use the word counterbalance. It's an active thing. You're always saying, well, I just worked really hard this week. Well, I'm going to take an extra day off now. I don't have to wait until the summer to take my big vacation. Maybe I need to actively rebalance now. And it becomes something you do very actively.
It reminds me almost a little bit, when still like Stephen Covey of the, that four quadrant. That one thing is
the
often
urgent, and the important.
Yeah, like it's kind of it's important, but often not the urgent thing. But by spending time on the thing that's really important, then you have less urgent things. Therefore, you have more time to, in this case, he would say, sharpen the saw, or spend time with your family, or do those other things. But it does require that you're not in permanent firefighting mode.
It's so true, and I don't know about you, but I was that student who was a perpetual procrastinator. I really never had to do many things in advance. I could wait till the last night or the few days before the big term paper was due and just really pour it on, work really long hours and make it work. It wasn't until much later in my adult life that I learned how being a little bit disciplined, right? Approaching your work and chipping away every day actually gets you so much more freedom. And I remember when I was writing with Gary, when we first wrote our first book, I think I averaged 14 written pages a day. It was the hardest I've ever worked in my life. And I usually completed my work by about 2 p.m. We would come in, we would hit it hard, break for lunch, wrap it up. And by, 1 or 2 p.m, I'd be essentially done with my assignment. And I remember writing on the wall. Actually, I didn't write on the wall. I wrote on a piece of paper, which I taped to the wall. Discipline is freedom. And it was the first time in my life that actually made sense to me.
I think that's the Navy SEALs. They have that as one of their phrases, I think.
Oh, well, I know that there's a Navy SEAL who just wrote a book about discipline, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. But the idea of discipline in our language is about training yourself to do something until it's habitual, right? It's an automatic. It's a habit. And so just showing up to work and doing the most important thing first, I found it to be very liberating mentally, because now when I broke in the afternoon, there was nothing hanging over my head. I wasn't postponing anything that was creating stress or anxiety. I actually had this sense of kind of rectitude that, wow, I really nailed it today. And then I actually might be thinking of how to reward myself versus feeling guilty about what I didn't do. So it just lined up a lot of dots for me. And that was like literally in the first 90 days I was working with Gary that I had that aha. And I've tried to carry on as best as I could to live that way, with him since then.
As you were kind of going through your journey as a writer and an editor as well, was there a time when you worked on something and you were giving it your heart and your soul, but it just didn't necessarily work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took from that experience?
I mean, I laughed about this with you before we started recording. My failures are so numerous. Like, where do we start? I can think of several examples, and I'll just say that there are a few of the books that we wrote that, because we did not do a formal analysis of the market, we were passionate about the project. I have no regrets that we didn't reach the kind of audience that I think we could have if we had been more purposeful in our approach, which we are much better at today. But a specific example of like one of the more demoralizing moments of my writing career, I remember I had written 37 drafts of a chapter of a book we wrote called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And I just kept pounding at this chapter, and about every 4 or 5 drafts, I would send it to Gary, and that was the way we work, right? So like we would pick an outline and say, this chapter speaks to me, I'll write it. And he'll say, no, I like this one, I'll write it. And then we edit each other's work. That's, the division of labor. And I kept sending it to him, and he kept sending it back. I remember walking into his office, and it was like draft number 37. And he waited till I sat down, and then he picked up the paper and he turned it over face down. And he goes, I think that we're working too hard to turn this into something great. We just need to start over. And I just wanted to vomit. It was horrible.
Because you had all those kind of sunk costs in this chapter.
Perfect. Wow, you're a mind reader. I mean, I had in my mind this sunk investment. I thought of all the days, maybe weeks that I'd spent trying to get that right, and him just wiping the table clean. And that was very devastating. I'd like to think that I rebounded while we were in the meeting. It probably took me going home, cussing, kicking the cat, having my wife talk me off a ledge. It probably took me a week to actually appreciate what had happened. But by wiping the slate clean, working together, we started with better raw materials. And I think we only went through like 3 drafts to get to what was the final product. So, I mean, the kind of big takeaway for me is that if I've not done the proper pre-work, if we don't have the model right to begin with, there's only so much you can dress that up. I usually tell people if the idea was a CID idea, great writing will only turn it into a B, maybe a B plus, but you just can't take it up 2 grade levels. And so Gary helped remind me, it's not how he purposely did it. It's like, these raw materials aren't worthwhile. Let's start over and build from a better foundation. And I've tried to carry that forward, because sometimes when I'm pounding my head on the wall, I realize now, without him having to show me, maybe it's time to just clear the decks and rethink this from the ground up. I actually did that on a project for my team today. I just said, we've overcomplicated this. Let's look at it from a completely different angle. And it kind of unlocked a lot of things for everybody in the room.
And in your journey, your life and your creative journey, can you tell us about an insight or a light bulb moment, that one of those aha moments in your life that made a real impact for you?
One of the more significant times for me, because we have a publishing house instead of a real estate company, and we're co-authors, like everything we do here is a little bit non-traditional. I'll just admit that. But at one point, I was asked to help write a book for our commercial real estate division, and I argued against it. At that time, I could only identify a market size of about 50,000 people, and that's not very big, because if there's only 50,000 people, what percentage of people even read books? Right? And so when you think about the investment that we put into our books, which is usually months and months and a couple of full-time salaries dedicated to these things, I could not see it being a payoff. But I was overruled, and I'm a team player, and I started working with a guy named Buddy Norman to write this book. And I remember talking to my wife about my plan. I just said, I don't think this book is going to be terribly successful. It doesn't have a big enough market. It won't have a huge impact. That doesn't get me excited. So I'm going to interview Buddy. He's an amazing expert at what he does. He's very knowledgeable, and I'm going to let this be his book. And it was a wonderful rationalization. And my wife called it for what it was. She said, you tell your wife and kids that you're a writer, and it sounds an awful lot like you're mailing it in. And I could hear the immense disappointment in her voice. And it's hard for me to talk about. I actually get kind of choked up even thinking about it today. But the aha for me was, I'm not writing for bestseller promotions. That actually doesn't, am I competitive? Yes. Do I want to win? Yes. But that doesn't actually matter at the end of the day. The things that matter more to me are continually being willing to earn the respect of my family. And when I disappointed her, that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And I completely changed my thinking about that project. So I would say this, I was very right about the market size. It just didn't sell that many because there's not that many people who wanted to read that book. And that's okay. But it did end up winning an award as one of the top 3 books in the real estate industry that year. And I'm very proud of that, because for all of the rational marketing size things that we talked about, like the book probably should not have been written for commercial purposes. But I reconnected with why I was writing. I reset my own personal expectations, and I actually did my best. And I'm very proud of the product that showed up. And so I guess moral of the story, aha, for me, is that I need to show up every day thinking not just about what the market size is or how excited I am about the idea, that I need to be doing my best possible work, because there is a very small subset of people that are looking to me and expecting me to do that, and I don't want to disappoint them. So it's kind of cheesy, but very meaningful to me.
No, I mean, it's great. It's great that you have those people around you as well that will stop you from just mailing it in, as you say, as well, and will kind of hold you to a higher standard in your work. Not because of any, because like there's necessarily a financial gain, but they just know they know that you're more than that. They know that you can achieve more than that as well in what you're doing.
I carry my goals with me everywhere I go, James, and at the top, I've got to be the best husband and father I can be, is kind of where I know I need to be directed, and that's where that manifests. And then I borrowed a page from Greg McKeown, if I'm saying his name correctly. He wrote the book Essentialism, if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, great book.
He had a really cool thing at the back where he had his core values, and if something didn't score a 9 out of 10 on all of them, he would say no. And so I wrote family, impact, and abundance as 3 core values that I have. And if it doesn't ring a 9 on all 3 of those, I have to say no. And so like I have the idea, and then I have the decision-making tool to kind of keep me true when I'm looking at what I'm planning to do in any 5 or 1 year period.
It's funny, as my friend Derek Sivers would said, if it's not a 9 or a 10, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So
I've heard that said even with some more profanity attached. I think
exactly, that's the very clean version. And I would say the only caveat I would have on that one is I think if someone's starting in their career, I think maybe that's not necessarily the best choice to go with sometimes, because you want to try lots of different things and have lots of different experiences. And sometimes there may be things that don't personally excite you that much, but there's something that you're going to be able to learn from that experience. That was my only caveat to what Derek Sivers said.
I completely agree with that caveat as well. That's great advice for people who are more clear about what they value and what they want and have lived a little bit of life. There's a little bit of experimentation on the front end that's very beneficial for people.
And do you have an online resource or a tool or a mobile app like Evernote, for example, that you find really useful for the work that you do?
It's cliche. I mean, I'm a writer. I love Evernote. I remember when someone first mentioned it to me. I've been a power user, I don't even know how long, but within, I think, 9 months, I got the little thing that said, this is no longer free. You have to pay $99 a year. Like, I didn't hesitate. My credit card was out so fast because I had built, to me, it's my brain in the cloud. I don't have to remember to bookmark things. I don't have to have a million tabs open on my browsers anymore. And I can look up anything. It's got a great search feature. So for writing, that's one of my number one tools. Does it have to be a digital tool?
It can be an analog one. A lot of our guests have especially writers, they have both an analog and a digital.
So to me, I use that tremendously in another tool called Wunderlist. And I like that because I can assign priority to tasks, and I can also share my task list with other people in my life. So those are my 2 virtual tools, Wunderlist with a W-U-N, right, instead of Wonder with an O, and an Evernote. And then I have a notebook. I'm my feet right now at my standing desk. One of them is on a chest that I have every notebook I've written in going back to the year 2000. And I just use, I've now kind of got a specific model that I like that's really durable. It's like some Spanish brand that starts with an M. I couldn't even tell you what it is, but I've got it in Evernote if I have to look it up. But I always have a notebook with me, and I typically have a month at a glance calendar with me as well. And that's something I learned from Gary. I've nearly made so many mistakes by trying to plan my time on a phone or even a week at a glance on my computer. If you really have big projects, and writers do, you have to look at big blocks of time. And so I don't track all of my appointments on this monthly calendar, but I've got all my writing days laid out, and all of my vacation days laid out, and all of my speaking days laid out. And so I can look up, and for instance, next month, we're doing a huge family vacation. We're going to go to Italy for 2 weeks. And I was sharing with one of my staff members today. She was asking about getting some time this week. And I said, look, this is April, and I've got a lot of writing days. but I'm being really tough about giving up that writing time right now. So we'll have to do it otherwise. And she asked why. And I just said, I flipped the page. I said, look at my May. I've only got 10 writing days left if I truly take this time off. So I'm being a real kind of a hard ass before and after. But because I've got a big perspective on time, I know the value of those days and I appreciate them better. So my two analog tools are just a notebook so I can always capture ideas and take notes wherever I am. And then my calendar so that I don't lose track of where I'm going, which I just think is really easy to do these days.
In the one thing, you talk a lot about blocking time. We don't have enough time in this conversation to talk about it, but it's actually one of the most powerful parts of the book as well, in terms of how you block time to ensure that one thing is kind of an immovable part of your day as well. And I think that's if sometimes if people only take one thing away from that book, I think that's actually one of the most powerful parts in that book as well. Because if
it's important to you, put it on your calendar.
Yeah, exactly.
And that simple fact that it's funny, you ask someone, they say, I want to do that. You can then ask as a leader, when will you do that? And you see them go internal and they're calculating and they're looking at their calendar. And that little act of navigating time to dedicate time to do a task, you're also thinking, how long will this take me? And you're planning. I mean, it's a kind of really fast-tracked planning. The research that we found suggests that just that act of putting it on the calendar makes you about 3 times more likely to do it.
Very interesting. And then what would a book be that you would recommend? Obviously, it can't be one of your own books, but maybe a book on something you've...
Oh, I never recommend my own books.
Never recommend your own books, but is there a book that you would you'd recommend to someone? It could be on any kind of topic. You could maybe it was a book that you think maybe needs to be discovered more by other writers, or a book that's had a huge impact in your life.
I mean, because of the name, The Creative Life, like the first 2 books I thought of, I've already mentioned one. I've given away probably 50 copies of On Writing by Stephen King. I found it immensely reassuring, that he started late, but he developed wonderful habits, and he's been one of the most prolific writers of our time. Whatever you think of as writing, he certainly seems to be very happy and has now got 2 other writers in the family. So I give that one away a lot for prospective writers. And then I'm sure someone's recommended Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art.
Yeah.
I just keep a stack of them in my office, and I give that to entrepreneurs and writers alike. So both of those have been recommended dozens of times.
Actually, on writing, not that many times, I would say. The War of Art is one of those kind of perennials, and it's funny because it's not just that one is not recommended just by writers. I've actually had a lot of entrepreneurs that have recommended that book as well, because resistance relates regardless of whether you're doing the traditional, let's say, creative arts, or whether you're building $1 million business.
Well, then let me give you one that's really off the beaten track. I bet you haven't read this one, but I've given away probably 20 copies. So I don't remember who it was. I think it was a guy named Tim Grawl who wrote a book called Your First 1,000 Copies. But I remember my aha there was, of all the things we did to market our books, our personal email list was always the most productive. That was just, we had complete control over it. And it really was just effective. It was a very, very effective use of our time and energy to build and maintain that list. And he wrote about that effectively. So I read about that every year. Last year, I read a book called Do Open by a guy named David Hyatt, Hiatt. And he's a guy who built a blue jean company in Ireland, I believe, almost completely on a newsletter. And it's very instructive, very, very pragmatic, which is very important for me on nonfiction books. Like, it's great that you've changed my mind. Now, point me in the direction of what to do. So it's very prescriptive. And it's also 154 pages. So it's quick, short, practical read. And if you're a creative and you have a newsletter, you'll pick up 5 or 10 great ideas just from this one read.
Great. And we'll put all these links on the show notes. People go to jamestaylor.me, just look for Jay Papasan, and you're going to find all these links as well. Final question for you, Jay. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge you've acquired, but no one knows you, and you know no one. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
So many of our books have been written around the idea of it's not what Gary thinks or Jay thinks. I mean, that's our hypothesis, but the truth is, I've been asked this question before, and it's a powerful question. The honest answer is I don't know how much would really change about my life if, let's just imagine that I could continue paying rent for the next couple of months, right? I didn't have to, because books take a little time to write. I would still write books, and I would look for a challenge that I myself was interested in, like, writing a great newsletter or being a better husband. Like, it's a question that I'm asking and that I think other people are asking too. And then a huge part of our success has been go identify about 20 or 30, or in some cases, we've done 100 interviews with people who are incredibly objectively excellent at facing that challenge, and then look for what they all do. What do they all have in common? And that, to me, has been the essence of how we build models that we write to. I find it incredibly rewarding intellectually to do that process. It's a big puzzle. And you're looking for those commonalities, because if 20 people are fundamentally doing the same 7 things in their attempt to climb Mount Everest, chances are almost anybody can do those 7 things. Versus if I look at one person and try to model their success, they may have a unique ability that just can't be copied. And so we try to write books. I would want to write books if everything got taken away that would really help people. And I feel like that's a way to get to that truth. And I'm really happy when I'm doing that all day. So I would probably continue doing that and be writing the next book. It just might be less connected to my partner's goals than it is today if I was off by myself.
So the book, The One Thing, is out now. It's been out for a little while now. It's one of my favorite books. I actually have the audio version because I really enjoy listening. I don't know who did the voice work on that particular book as well, but he's got a great voice, and it's just a really lovely book to listen to when you're on the go as well. So we're going to have a link to the book. If people want to reach out to you, Jay, to maybe learn more about your other books that you have in your series, and just to find out other things that you've got going on just now, where's the best place for them to go and do that?
I would probably start at theonething.com, and that's with the number one. So then the number one, thing.com. You've got links to our other books there on the site and what we're doing around the book. And that's a great starting place. And I know that it's up to date since that's kind of our lead site right now. And I also have a wonderfully Googleable name. So if they search for Jay Papasan, they're going to find me. And unlike a lot of other authors, like I maintain a social media presence. I don't maintain it daily. But when people send me private messages about our books, I try to always get to them and I answer them personally. And so far, that's something I've been able to batch and scale, and I learned so much from it, I don't really want to give it up. So that would be a direct path to connecting with me if someone was interested.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us about your creative life. I wish you all the best with your continued writing, and I want to say once again what a great book The One Thing is. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.